Happy holidays from the U.S. China Policy Foundation. We would like to close out 2022 with a New Year's message from our president, Professor Chi Wang, along with a video compilation highlighting our past programs and events. Professor Wang?
Greetings and happy holidays. As this year comes to a close, I would like to take a moment to reflect on the important work of the U.S. China Policy Foundation and thank our friends for their continued dedication and support. The U.S. China relationship is arguably the most important and also the most complex bilateral relationship in the world. High-level meetings like the recent one between Joe Biden and Xi Jinping are certainly most important, but they are not enough, especially during times of increased tension and political hawkishness. When official engagement falls flat, it is up to informal avenues to keep dialogue open. Our staff, board members, sponsors, and friends understand the need to promote mutual understanding and people-to-people engagement. We may remain dedicated to our mission, and I am so proud of what we have accomplished over the years. We cannot do it alone. I hope everyone watching will join me in continuing these efforts. The future of the U.S.-China relationship affects all of us, and it is our duty to do this our part to make sure the future is a positive one. Thank you again for your support. We hope to see you all in person again in 2023.
Now let's take a moment to look back at past USCPF programs and events. This compilation includes remarks from U.S. and Chinese officials, diplomats, and scholars discussing the history and importance of the U.S.-China relationship and their hopes for the future.
There's a lot to resolve. There are a lot of different issues, but we need to have that dialogue and have this going and coming, talking to each other and trying to resolve some of these problems. It doesn't mean we'll always agree on the issues of concern, but it takes a while, and it's good to try to keep up that momentum. I think that's very important.
I think a lot of us think that the right way to deal with the outside world is to have a skillful diplomacy backed up by credible military power. But the military power should be in the back, not in the front. And we sometimes get that backwards. And I think that's one of the deficiencies in America's diplomacy. Because when you have sufficient military power to be able to alter an outcome, if your diplomacy fails, then there's a tendency to resort to it anyway. Other countries have to depend on their diplomacy in order to advance their national interests. We have two options. One is diplomacy and one is military power. And too often, we skimp the diplomacy and use the military power to get what we want. But we discover that we can't get with what we want if we use military power where it's not the appropriate instrument for accomplishing our national goals. So in my experience, we are capable of stunningly effective diplomacy when we put our mind to it. And we have the professional diplomats who have the experience, the language skills, and the desire to improve our relations with foreign countries and to overcome difficult issues in the process. But we don't always use those people as effectively as we could.
President Nixon, President Carter, and their Chinese counterparts understood the importance of working together. And this is not the first time that U.S.-China the relationship has faced a period of tension. In fact, during my tenure as U.S. ambassador to China alone, we had to deal with two major conflicts. As I took up my post in February of 1996, the People's Republic of China was conducting military exercises and missile tests in the Taiwan Strait. In response, the government of the United States dispatched 2 aircraft carrier groups into that region. This is what I call a sweaty palms time. In 1996, after we spent 3 years building ties in Beijing, a U.S. bomb hit the Chinese embassy in Belgrade during the NATO strikes on Yugoslavia. Chinese diplomats were killed by U.S. bombs. Demonstrations sprung up across China. Protesters burned the Consul General's house in Guangzhou. Demonstrations sprung up in Beijing. The U.S. embassy there was almost destroyed. My wife and child were confined to our residence in fear of their lives. But we worked through that. And we worked through it because of a strong working relationship with Chinese leaders such as President Jiang Zemin and President Zhu Rongji. The diplomatic capital was in place to effectively address these areas of concern and swiftly respond to unexpected conflicts as they arose. And I look back on this time simply to say that this is not the first time that we've had serious difficulties. But the answer is not to go backwards. Ending engagement will not somehow turn back the clock. China is a large, influential country that cannot be ignored, nor should we want to ignore it.
The conversation itself was certainly not embroiled in bickering over minor issues, but was rather one between leaders of 2 great countries who had vision and took the long view, with the big picture in mind. Although each side knew that they had vast differences and a history of mutual animosity, they had come together for an earnest exchange of views on the strategic level so as to seek common ground and a better future.
To me, what is really most striking about the Sino-American relationship is the existence, the persistence of parallel narratives. The Shanghai Communique exemplifies this with its candid recitation of differences, plus its affirmation of the potential interest inherent in our possibly overcoming these differences. Our 2 countries have seldom agreed about much of anything, but we have agreed about enough to produce mutually advantageous results. We've managed to achieve a reasonable facsimile of cooperation without, for the most part, working together. We may not have agreed on joint action, but we have contrived to follow parallel policies. 42 years ago, during the Nixon visit to Beijing, I got into a mild argument with Zhang Hanzhi, the late Zhang Hanzhi, a lovely lady whose passing diminishes us all, about what parallel policies might mean. Parallel can be rendered in Chinese in at least two ways. Ms. Zhang seemed to favor 并行不悖. This defines parallel in mathematical terms. It means lines that proceed equidistantly and never converge. I told her I preferred 异途同归, which means to proceed by different paths to the same ends. 并行不悖 implies eternal differences. 异途同归 suggests that common goals can be pursued by separately decided paths. We still don't know which definition of parallel will ultimately apply in Sino-American relations, but I remain optimistic. I believe that China and the United States can chart the courses we must, either separately or jointly, to destinations that serve the interests of both countries.
These days, some in fact argue that the emerging American-Chinese duopoly in the world must inherently generate eventual hostility. And hence, they conclude that conflict between America and China is inevitable. And admittedly, it is a historical fact that during the last 200 years, since the onset of what we might call global politics, 4 long wars were fought for domination over Europe, starting first of all from 1812 to 1815 because of Napoleonic global ambitions. Then from 1914 to 18 because of Germanic imperial frustrations. From 1939 to 1945 because of Nazi madness. And from the late 1940s to the early 1990s because of Soviet worldwide ideological ambitions. And indeed, every one of these conflicts could have resulted in global hegemony by a sole power. However, I personally do not believe that wars for global domination are still a serious prospect in what is now clearly the post-hegemonic age. First of all, nuclear weapons make hegemonic wars too destructive, and thus victory meaningless. One-sided national economic triumphs cannot be achieved in the increasingly interwoven global economy without precipitating calamitous consequences for everyone. The populations of the world are now politically awakened, activist, and hence not easily subdued, even by much more powerful nations. Last but not least, neither America nor China are driven by hostile ideologies, and neither one of them is suicidal. Moreover, it is important to recognize that both of our societies are open. Both societies are open, even though our political systems are very different. That, too, offsets pressures from within each respective society towards animus and hostility.
I think one of the highlights of the relationship has been the subnational relationship. And I think a lot of the progress in the relationship goes back to the sister states that have been developed between American states and Chinese provinces, and the sister city relationships as well. Those build friendships, and friendships can build trust, and that has led to significant trade and other cultural exchanges between the United States and China. A lot of ups and downs in that experience, but I think it's critically important that we recognize the Chinese take the long view of things, and we need to always look at ways that we can try to work out our differences and find the fact that the Chinese people are wonderful people. They have a great work ethic. They're very committed to education of their children, and they're very family oriented. So we need to get to know the Chinese people. We need them to get to know us, and that can build friendships and hopefully trust and better relationship down the road.
I think there's no more important relationship in today's world than the one between the United States and the PRC. And that's because of the incredibly large number of people involved, the populations of the two countries, the relative impact economically and militarily, socially, and every other aspect on this world. And as we look to the future, it's something that requires, in my opinion, a lot of attention and a lot of hard work. And of all aspects of the relationship between the U.S. and the PRC, the one that I found, certainly during my time out in the Pacific, that was lacking and dragging behind the others was the relationship between the two militaries. I think it's very, very important that this be addressed on a regular basis, and the attention that's now being paid to it, I think, is very appropriate. It's important because as the two countries continue to evolve, and as China's growth and stature increase in Asia, and their impact in Asia and the rest of the world grows, there's going to be some certain inevitability of competition. And I think it's critically important that that competition be channeled in a way that's helpful to the people of our two countries and the world. And the necessity, in my opinion, for good relations and a good understanding between the military leaders and on down the, as we say in the military, chain of command, from the highest to the more junior people, is very, very important. And it's important because we cannot afford, in my opinion, to make a mistake, to make a misjudgment, to make assumptions that are based on a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding. And unless, in my experience of some years out at sea and in dealing with people in other countries, unless people get to know one another and understand what they're thinking about and understand their priorities and fundamentally recognize that people, whether they're from China, the United States, from Europe, from Africa, whatever, that we're fundamentally the same people with the same desires and needs, then potential trouble looms.
In a 2018 guest lecture at Emory University, President Carter recalled, "It's very important for our two countries and the world to maintain their relationship with mutual respect. We have different histories, different cultures, different ideas, and certainly different political systems. But those differences should be accommodated by presidents of the United States and by the leaders of China. Maintaining mutual respect and proper understanding between the U.S. and China is important. We share important responsibilities, and this is still absolutely crucial for our two countries and for the world." I agree with President Carter, and so do many Americans. Our relationship is too important to be driven by dueling nationalisms.
In his book, World Order, Dr. Henry Kissinger said, and I'll quote, Each generation will be judged by whether the greatest, most consequential issues of the human condition have been faced. And today, we are confronted with such a test. Are we able to build a more stable and prosperous world for the benefits of all countries? Can China and the United States take the lead in these joint efforts? I hope and I believe our two countries will make the right choice to confront the challenges and seize the historic opportunities. But this is not only a task for our two governments. We need the support and participation of our two peoples.
And a strong U.S. China relationship is good for the entire world. Because so many of the issues confronting our world, from climate change to finding cures for the most dreaded diseases, to fighting terrorism, to alleviating hunger, cannot be solved by the United States or China alone. The world is looking for leadership from both China and the United States joining together to address these very tough issues. And so I applaud the U.S. China Policy Foundation for all that it's doing to promote more understanding and exchange between our two countries. Because, quite frankly, diplomacy first begins with people-to-people exchange. The more that people understand each other, visit each other's countries, learn each other's history and culture and the challenges facing each other, the more effective we can ultimately be in diplomacy.
As Secretary Blinken has said, the relationship between the United States and the People's Republic of China is the biggest geopolitical test of the 21st century. You've heard it before. Our relationship with the PRC will be competitive when it should be, collaborative when it can be, and adversarial when it must be.
The China-U.S. relationship is at a critical juncture. Last month, President Xi Jinping held a virtual meeting with President Joe Biden. As President Xi pointed out in the meeting, the most important event in international relations over the past 50 years was the reopening and the development of China-U.S. relations. The most important event in international relations in the coming 50 years will be for China and the U.S. to find the right way to get along.
And I support a comprehensive China strategy oriented around four guiding principles. Recognizing there are existing areas of conflict and competition. Let's just call things what they are. Second, to expand the economic playbook to include offensive measures so the U.S. Is more competitive, such as the passage of the recent infrastructure law, which is a major long-term investment in U.S. workers and the U.S. economy. Third, let's identify areas where bilateral cooperation is in both nations' interests. And fourth, let's just get our own house in order. That includes passing the Build Back Better Act to support the U.S. economy and the U.S. workforce, and passing some version of the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. These are good additional steps. So I'll continue to promote this broader strategy to my colleagues in Congress and to all of you who are critical stakeholders in this relationship. In conclusion, just let me say the U.S.-China relationship is complex. It can only grow and improve through engagement and dedication. Every relationship takes a lot of work, and it's important to focus on the actions the U.S. can take to move the relationship forward. But these small efforts can only help to strengthen the bilateral relationship and build us towards larger efforts.
Much better to work with each other than not. This current trend is very, very troublesome to me, and it's going to take a lot of work to turn that around. Hope springs eternal. All of us in public service essentially are optimists, and as dire situation might seem at the time. It'll get better if we keep trying to make it better. If we don't keep trying to make it better, it's not going to get better. So it's really a call and a reminder of the value of optimism and working hard to make things better.
We hope you enjoyed the video clips. The full videos from these programs are available on the USCPF YouTube channel and on our website. Thank you all for your friendship and support over the past year. Wishing you all the best in 2023.